Where did that kind of like come from? Like, how did you feel like, you wanted to do everything solo versus like finding people to like kind of collaborate with?
Honestly, I think part of it was just not actually being within like indie comic circles from the get
Oh, cool.
go.
Yeah.
Um, I was someone who kind of always dabbled in like small comic strips or little comics here and there through high school. I put it down for about, you know, 5, 6, 7 years as I became an adult, got into working. Um, and then in 2019, um, as I was working on my current comic right now, Husk, I was not on Twitter, so I didn't know about the indie comic circles there. I was mainly active on Instagram, and there really isn't, at least at the time, there really wasn't like an indie comics community that I was aware of at the time. So I had no exposure to, hey, you can put together teams. In my experience. I really only understood it as like you've got the professionals who are hired by the big two or some of like indie publishing, uh, um, not companies, publishers,
Yeah.
or you just kind of go it alone. And like the one of my biggest influences, I realize I'm kind of going a little sideways.
No,
It'll
please.
make
Yeah,
sense
no, I
just
love
for
it.
a
No,
second.
yeah, so much. Yeah, I love it.
One of my biggest influences was Joan and Vasquez. So like
Okay.
I grew up watching, Invader Zim, but also reading Johnny the Homicidal Maniac.
Yeah.
I did read Squee. I did not read I Feel Sick. I still haven't gotten a copy of that. But in my head, I'm like, okay, one person, cool.
Hmm.
So if he can do it, I can do it. So yeah, that's pretty much where it started. I just thought, well, if I can write the story, if I can draw the story, I'll learn to letter. So I went
Hmm.
looking for all of the tutorials I could, all up and down YouTube. I also went and when I did finally join Twitter, I had found out about um, the name's escaping me right now. Shoot, I don't. It's not Kablam Studios. It's like
I feel like that's something that sounds familiar. I'm so bad with like remembering like Instagram and then Twitter handles at the same time. But yeah, like
yeah.
finding those resources that really just kind of call to you to like, give you some information on that. Cause I
Hmm.
feel like lettering, especially like when you're teaching yourself, it's one of the most difficult parts because
Hmm.
like lettering can really just like make or break a comic. And you're really
Yeah.
finding like a flavor. And especially for Husk, like you really wanted to find like something that was like more of that Todd Klein, like I'm not just gonna do a basic word bubble for everything. Like you wanted it to have like a design aspect to it and some flavor
Hmm.
to it. So you
Hmm.
can't. I can only imagine like the tutorials and time that it took to make those word bubbles like the way you do.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I kind of shot myself in the foot with that. It wasn't until after I created those balloons to make them appear hand drawn
Yeah.
that I learned, like, oh, I could have gone very simple and I could have gone with like a balloon that would be much more easily editable
Hmm.
as I like change the size, change the shape. The way that I have it, there's the outline that you see is actually a faux effect. So it's a shape in black behind a shape in white. The issue with that is like I work in Adobe Illustrator,
Hmm.
because they're shapes and not a stroke. Um,
Oh.
as I resize, I have to adjust the relative size between those two shapes to make everything consistent. So it's a little extra time on the back end that I probably could have saved myself with a little extra preparation. But I'm in this for the long haul. So I'm like, all right, if I can figure out how to apply that hand drawn look to a stroke later, great.
Win.
If not, in the meantime, I'm just plugging along with what I got.
How long does it take you to kind of work through? I mean, I noticed you publish everything on your website like page by page. You're kind of doing it like blog posts, pretty much. Like, is that the way you kind of structure your story, and you just want to release it just to kind of get it out there to audiences? And like, how long does it take you to work on each page at that point too?
It's kind of a it's been a wild journey getting there. I know that from the get go, I had always wanted to format the comic for print. page by
Hmm.
page, old school, like Smack Jeeves style. Um, and so I I kind of went about developing it sort of in like a roundabout way. Um, I knew I wanted to jump in and like, okay, here's my script, here's how issue one's going to go, here's how the rest of the story is going to go. It's I'm figuring out how to lay out all of my pages, and then I knew that like I want to finish each issue before I roll them out page by page, so that takes the stress off of my plate as far
Mm.
as okay, I got to get a page done every week. Um, I started working on Husk in it was early 2021, like actually putting pen to paper,
Cool.
um, 2021. And um, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought real quick. Um, the the way that I went about it, like there was already so much going on, like
Oh yeah.
in
Just
2021, that I
hmm
was like, I really don't need to impose a weekly schedule on myself, especially as someone who is still very green to
yeah.
comics. I had done one challenge on Twitter, which was um, February, if you're
Oh,
familiar.
cool. I've heard of that
February,
one.
yes, it's a challenge with storyboard artists in mind, where
Hmm.
you give yourself the whole month of February. You create a storyboard that eventually becomes an animatic, and by the end of the month, you have a completed project. Or you could take a different route, where each week you do a smaller story, smaller boards, and then by the end of the month, you have 4 animatics that
Oh
are much
wow.
shorter. I saw that and I thought, this is a great opportunity to challenge myself to like really get my feet wet and see if comics really are something that I want to do.
Yeah.
So I took that. I did a 6-page black and white prequel comic. It's called Suss Out. It's free to read on my Ko-fi.
Cool.
Um, got that done in the month, and that's pretty much what had decided for me, like, okay, cool, I want to jump into this. Um, but so like after that, like figuring out how to actually go issue by issue, um, was definitely a learning curve. Was definitely
Yeah.
like, okay, how do I organize? So issue one was much more of a rocky start, getting that done. And then issue two, I actually just wrapped up. I got my prints
Oh, cool.
last week. They
Yeah.
look beautiful. Um, and every issue as it goes by, I'm making adjustments here and there. I'm figuring out, I'm learning from more resources, learning from other people, like what is your process, what works for you, and figuring out like, okay, um, you know what can I do to better expedite my
Hmm.
process, and I can still put out a good product without losing my sanity.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like that's such a cool approach you kind of took from it from the beginning as well. Like using that storyboard formatting and giving yourself a challenge. That's not even like a comic book really related challenge, but you went about it in a way that you felt comfortable. And I think that's a really good goal to have, especially as a beginner creator or for any creator, is that sometimes when you put too much pressure on yourself to be like, I need to get a page done weekly, I need to write daily, I need to do X, Y, and Z that I hear from like these pros and everyone like
Hmm.
encourage us to do, like especially during those times that you're talking about, that
Hmm.
2021
Hmm.
COVID-ish area, like everything felt so like just tense, and everything felt like
Yeah.
whatever I put too much into like a crumble, and just stressful. It was hard for a lot of people to really free themselves. A lot of comics came out from that time, which is great, but I feel like those barriers and like getting started sometimes just kind of hurt, and it was kind of hard. So I could totally see where you're coming from on that.
With comics will spread.